All right, everyone, we'll go ahead and get started. So I'm going to be sharing some newer work that I'm doing. So it's stuff we've been using for maybe a couple of years now, but it's solving some problems that we have seen ourselves run into, but also a lot of the innovators and entrepreneurs we work with. So to set the stage, this morning I ended my talk with "Love the problem, not your solution." And that's something that has kind of both inspired us as a company, but it's really what we continuously try to do. As many of you know, there is the original business model canvas. One of the reasons that I really changed it is because I felt the business model canvas was really talking more about a business plan. And that requires you to understand a bit more about your business. But when you're dealing in the early stages of an idea, you don't quite know where you're going to end up. So you have to start at a much more fundamental level. So before you can start talking about your key resources and key activities and even key partners, you have to fundamentally talk about how do you create value. So who are your customers? What problems do you solve? And how might you start solving them? So those were some of the changes that I made in the canvas and why I made some of those changes. The goal was not to create necessarily a better canvas, but really it's a different paradigm. I look at the business model canvas coming at it more from a strategic or consulting mindset. The lean canvas comes at it more from a problem, solution, customer type of mindset. And especially in the beginning, those are some of the things you have to focus in on. So while I've highlighted some of the changes I made here, I have, looking back, realized that the biggest change that has had the most impact is really adding this problem box. Because it's problem focused, I'll make a case of how problems really are where you create space for innovation. If you can't find problems out in the marketplace, there's really no room for a new solution. So you really have to find problems because that's where solutions come into existence and fit into those spaces. The other thing, which was rather accidental, I did this for myself. So like a lot of entrepreneurs, I love solutions. I'm in love with my solutions. And so I had to have a solution box in there. But I realized that by adding that small box, making it small forced the entrepreneur to focus on other things, which was intentional. But just adding the solution box allows a lot of innovators and entrepreneurs look at the lean canvas not like a business tool, but really as a product tool. And I think that has had, I'm just sharing kind of more of my experiences, that has had kind of a subtle effect in getting people to adopt the lean canvas, I think, faster. Simply because everyone wants to talk about their solution. When they see the business model canvas, it's like, oh, I need to go and do some business thing. But if you show them a lean canvas, it's like, oh, you want to know about my product? I'm happy to tell you about my product. So it has this subtle appeal to it. So this was why I emphasize problems as being very important, because you have to start with problems before you can do anything. So when I work with early stage teams, I have them fill out the entire canvas because you have to think of the entire business model. Because sometimes you can find problems which are interesting, like let's take a Twitter example, but you don't quite know if it will ever become a business. In their case, they got so much traction that they managed to build a business, but they're still struggling because that was never really the original intent. At the same time, in other cases, you might find problems which are interesting, but they're not monetizable. So you have to think of the whole business model from the beginning because it helps to prioritize where you might start. But once you have done the initial canvas, I encourage people to focus in on the pillars on the far left-hand side and really answer these fundamental questions. So who are your customers in the sense of what is the big addressable market? You know, is it big enough? Who are the early adopters? You can look at any successful company. They all start out, all big successful companies start out with a very small niche or early adopter audience. You need to identify who they are. And then on the right-hand side, on the left-hand side, you want to get to what problems do those early adopters really have? Not your mainstream customers, but the early adopters. So it's the canvas, again, is not meant to be a document to talk about what's happening 3 or 4 years from now. It's a snapshot of what's happening right now. So it's meant to be a tactical plan versus a long-range plan. So what are the problems your early adopters have? And then how do they solve them today? This is what I dig into with every team that I work with. And I want to understand, do they have evidence of these things, or are these guesses? Because if they don't have evidence, let's go find those out. And so that's what we set them out to do. So that's just a little bit of still running lean, kind of scaling lean type of thinking, which has been everything I've done up until now. Trying to put this to practice is more easily said than done. So if I tell people only think about problems, it's really hard to do. And the first reason is because of this bias that we all have, the love for the solution. So the innovator's bias or the entrepreneur's bias for the solution is so strong that if I tell you forget about your solution, you'll pretend to forget about it. But when you write your problems, you write it by faking them. So you actually look at the solution and say, if my customers had a problem, what might that be using my solution? And so you kind of fake them. That is still OK because you are forcing yourself to at least think about a problem and not just go and pitch your solution. And the right thing to do is then get outside the building and validate that they are indeed true. But my experience has been that when you do go out, you realize that none of your problems were correct. And then you have to start all over again, which is OK. And again, all of that is fine. But what I want to present here today is how you can get at problems without asking the question, what problems might you be solving? Because sometimes that bias is very hard to get rid of. So if I were building a photo sharing app, which is the example I share in my Running Lean book, if I'm convinced that I need to build a photo sharing app, I've got a hammer in my hand, and everything is going to look like a nail. So I'm going to convince myself that everyone struggles with photo sharing, and I will make up problems, and I'll go look for evidence. And that's where we run into traps of the biases. We may hear a few people say this is a problem, and we hear them louder than all the others who say they don't really have the problem. And we get into this trap of just following the biases instead of trying to follow the truth. So we'll talk about maybe a better way of navigating that. This is not just an ideation stage problem. Customers too have this bias. Anyone here who has an established product or has worked in a company where there's an established product and you deal with customer feature requests, you quickly realize if you look at those backlog of feature requests is that they're all solutions. No customer says, I have a problem, please go solve it for me, and here's what the problem is. They all would say, go and give me this feature, or go and build this for me, because I think that's what I need. And when you go and build those things and give it to them, you find that they don't even use it anyways, because it didn't solve the problem that they thought they had. And that's because customers too have this bias. They don't introspectively analyze themselves. If they did, we wouldn't need psychologists and doctors, because we aren't very good at analyzing ourselves. So customers would have to do a deep analysis of their problems, do deep 5 whys. And if they actually do all that work, they might as well just build a solution as well. Because if you understand the problem, the solution becomes easier to do. So that's the challenge of innovation, is how do we get at problems that customers have without asking them? How can we do that? Which is the third part here, is that you have to be able to do all this stuff without asking customers. Surveys and focus groups and those types of things never work. Simply because customers don't really know what their problem is. They too are solution oriented. And this is nicely summarized by the sentiment of Steve Jobs. Some of you might have read this in different contexts. But he never believed that it was the customer's job to know what they wanted. His job was to really go and study the customers, understand them, understand their struggle, and then go away in his head where he did all these thought experiments and try to design the best possible experience which actually solved the problem for the customer. But Apple never run surveys or focus groups. But unlike what people might believe, they do study customers. They do use their Genius bars, the places where you go and return their customer service. That's where they get lots of feedback on, are their products easy to use, are they not? They actually go out and study other people using other types of products. They study people unboxing their own products. They do a lot of design thinking types of observational studies to understand those problems that their customers might be running into. Any of you familiar with the jobs to be done framework? Maybe show of hands. So okay, maybe 4 or 5 hands. So this is something I ran into a few years ago. Well, I ran into it many years ago, but like many things, I didn't have a use for it, so it never really stuck with me. But I recently ran into it again, and I liked the approach, and I liked the simplicity of it. And I found that this was an interesting way to uncover problems without asking about those problems, which is really what this framework that I'm going to be sharing with you is inspired by. So jobs to be done, just to explain what it is. In the background here, out of focus, this is a video which you can watch later on. But it's Clayton Christensen, the person who he teaches at Harvard. He wrote 2 books, The Innovator's Dilemma, Innovator's Solution. Well, he's written more books than that, but those are the 2 that most people recognize him by. And in one of those books, he first introduced this jobs to be done theory. More recently, he has written a longer book on it. But it was kind of something I had read and was interesting, but it never really stuck. But the basic idea of the jobs to be done framework is that customers don't use products, they hire products to get a certain job done. And if you can understand the job, it gives you a lot of insights on what they were trying to achieve. It's a bit like outcomes. So it's a bit like what do customers want to achieve, and then from there you may extract problems. So there's a very popular case study that is on there on the web that you can go and check out. It's the milkshake case study. So if you Google jobs to be done and milkshake case study, maybe put Clayton Christensen, you may not have to. You'll find this video. I encourage watching it. I'll quickly summarize it since a lot of people here don't know what it is. It's a good way to introduce you to it. So Clayton Christensen was part of a team that was trying to increase milkshake sales for a major retailer. This was a really big brand that hired them. Prior to hiring them, they had done all the traditional marketing research. So they had done surveys and focus groups and taste tests, and they got lots of feedback. So they paid these people to come and try their milkshakes, tell them. The question was, how can we make this better? And they got dozens of suggestions. Because if you pay someone to give you feedback, they will. They came up with dozens of answers. And of course, they used a persona. So they thought these would be the most likely people to buy milkshakes. Let's survey them and let's run focus groups with them. Over several months, they implemented many of those ideas. The bottom line is they made no dent on sales. The sales just stayed stagnant. So everything they were doing wasn't working. That's when they said, let's go and hire these guys, and maybe they can uncover some insights. So the first thing they did is said, well, let's go, instead of assuming we know who the customer is, let's go and actually observe them. So they went to one of the retail outlets and parked themselves there for a whole day. They were there 15 hours just staring at people, trying to be not staring at them and freaking them out, but kind of in the background, just watching who was buying milkshakes. And they had one insight just very early in the morning, because they realized that most of the milkshakes that sold throughout the day was done between the hours of 8:30 and 9 o'clock, very early in the morning. And why would people be buying milkshakes for breakfast? Milkshake is not really a breakfast food. So that was the first insight. And the company was, of course, polling people, and their use case was people drinking milkshakes, in the evening after dinner, or maybe in the afternoon after lunch. But no one was ever thinking people would be consuming milkshakes in the morning. So that was kind of interesting, and that's where all the milkshakes were being sold, or most of them. So they went and began asking some of these customers the next day, why did you buy this milkshake? You had lots of options, and what were you trying to do? And in their language, they said, why did you hire this milkshake over something else? Because you could have hired something else. What job were you trying to do? And a lot of them said, well, I'm in a rush. I'm on my way to work. The milkshake was fast. I was able to get it. It comes in a plastic cup. I can put it in my cup holder, and I drive to work, and it gets the job done. And they said, oh, that's interesting. They said, before the milkshake, did you try other things when you were in that situation? And they said, yes, they've been trying. So some people shared stories about how they once hired a donut, and they got the steering wheel all sticky. So that was a bad idea. Somebody once hired bagel and cream cheese and almost got into an accident because they were driving and trying to put the cream cheese on. Somebody hired a candy bar and felt so guilty they never did that again. Somebody hired a banana, and 5 minutes later they were hungry. So in comparison, for the job, which is I have a boring commute to work, the milkshake was the perfect product for that particular job. It came in the cup. You just stuck it in there. You could drive as fast as you want. Whenever you were bored, you picked it up, took a sip, put it back down. Once you got to work, you weren't hungry because it had all this stuff in it. It just kept you full. So until lunch, you didn't have to do anything. And that was what they learned. So once they understood the job people were trying to do, they came up with dozens of ideas of how they could improve the product. What may be some of the product improvements you might make, given the story I just gave you? Maybe just a handful. Anyone have any suggestions for how you might improve the product? Yep.
Put it in a cup that keeps it cold longer.
Yeah. So if people want to keep their cup colder longer, maybe it's an insulated cup. There were other suggestions like these people are in a hurry. This was back in the 80s. I didn't set that context. So drive-through lanes were not as popular. But maybe add this in the drive-through lane. Maybe add a checkout counter. Maybe have a self-service card where they can come in, use a machine, fill up their milkshake, and drive away. So they're on their way to work. They don't have a lot of time. So that is one of the dimensions, one of the axes that you could improve on, which is come in and come out, and you go. Other suggestions were blend in some fruit, because remember, these people are on a boring commute. They want something interesting to do. If they suck up a piece of frozen fruit, it changes the dynamic. It's like, what just went in my mouth? Let me figure out, is it a strawberry? Is it a banana? So that makes the ride more interesting. Right? So once you start thinking in terms of the job, it just gives you a host of possibilities. No one ever said that we want a better tasting milkshake. They all just wanted a milkshake that did the job that they wanted it to do, which is help me not be hungry when I get to work and make my ride interesting. So once you understand the job, you can come up with all these things. What was even more interesting is none of these people said that I bought this milkshake because it's better than that milkshake. And that was one of the key insights, is that milkshakes were not competing with other milkshakes, which is what the retailer thought. They were thinking we're competing with another retailer, so let's make our milkshake better. They were competing with Snicker bars and bananas and bagels and donuts, and that's who their competition was. And that's something to kind of keep in mind, and we'll come back to this in a second. So the thing to realize, and this is what Jobs to be Done is ultimately about, is that customers are trying to get a certain job done, or they're trying to get certain progress in their lives. They're trying to do something, and in the way of doing it, there are sometimes obstacles. There are sometimes characteristics of what would make that job be a good job, and that's what you need to uncover. If you uncover those, you uncover the problems, and you can uncover things that might be interesting to fix. So this visual will help bring this to light, and it's also a new, it's not a canvas, but it's a new worksheet you can use to kind of visualize the jobs to be done. So this is your customer. They're kind of in a wide, empty space. Customers don't buy things impulsively. None of you woke up today and had a dream to go and buy a car, and you just went and bought the car. Things like that, especially if it's a heavy ticket item, there's lots of research that goes into it, and this process begins to talk about what those steps might be. What does that customer journey look like? Even if it's not a 30,000, 40,000 euro car, even if it's just an iPhone, or it's even just where your kids go to school, all of those things are big decisions that take a lot of time to make. And even sometimes small decisions like where should we have dinner tonight can lead into a big discussion like you'll see over here. So the first thing to kind of realize is that people don't impulsively buy anything. There's usually some kind of triggering event. So if you go out to have dinner and drinks with a friend today, and the first person that you meet says, I just bought a car last week, that's interesting, you might say that's nice. If the second friend comes along and they too bought a car in the last 30 days, and the third friend also bought a car in the last 90 days, all of a sudden your car, which was perfectly fine 5 minutes ago, is going to look old. You're going to ask myself, why am I driving this 10-year-old car? Maybe I should upgrade. Maybe I should go and buy the new ones. And you start paying attention to advertising. And several months might go by before you make your decision, but that is the trigger. Right? So that's how we think of triggers. So the triggers are the things that cause you to want to seek a solution. So let's say it's the holidays, and I get on a scale, and I realize I've gained 5 kilos. Now, that happened gradually over time. But that instant when I got on the scale and realized it and wanted to do something about it, that's my triggering condition. So those are the types of things you want to realize or understand, and that, in many ways, is the early adopter criteria that is actionable. So when you look at the lean canvas, there's a box here for the early adopters, and I talk about distinguishing characteristics. A lot of people just describe demographics, like I'm going after a startup or I'm going after an enterprise. But what's more important is to describe what triggers might cause them, like cause this startup to seek something. So what behavioral things have changed in their life? Did somebody get promoted? Did they have a new CEO? Did somebody get fired? You know, what happened that's causing them to look for a solution? So the example that I give in Running Lean, which was a photo sharing app, one of my early adopters was a first-time mom with a young child. And that's an example of a good early adopter criteria, because it has some demographics in there. It has gender, because I knew moms versus dads were doing most of the sharing. But the real trigger there was the fact that they had a baby, and their first baby. And when you have a first baby, your whole world changes. There's a lot of anxiety, there's a lot of excitement all at the same time. And that's a triggering condition. So that's a point where whatever solution they were using before may not be good enough, and they start looking for new solutions. So that's how you think of the triggering condition. Oops, I think that's going to do that a few times. Anyways, so the triggering event kind of causes a desire to seek a better outcome, progress. So this is where the customer begins to start defining what their goal or outcome is. So when I got on that scale, I had gained 5 kilos very quickly. I might say, well, I need to lose 5 kilos in 3 months. And that becomes my desired outcome or goal. And now I'm looking for solutions kind of around that. Now, the way this maps onto the canvas, this would be your unique value proposition. So you want to start with your customer's unique value proposition. Imagine them in their world. There's some triggering condition. What are they trying to achieve? What is this job, and what are they trying to do? So that would be the desired outcome. The other thing to kind of realize from the jobs framework, the reason it's called a jobs framework is that there is a switching behavior, which is why this talk is titled the switch framework, is that for customers to hire a particular product, they typically have to fire something else. In the milkshake example, for them to decide to go and get a milkshake, there's only so much space in their stomach. They have to stop not getting the banana or the bagel and cream cheese or the donut. So there's some kind of a switch that begins to happen, and the product that does the job best is the one that wins that job category. So that's something to kind of internalize. And to kind of put this into action, we can use it to describe the difference between inventions and innovations. So today I talked a little bit about how inventions are technologies or things we build which do a certain thing better. But until you can turn that into a business model outcome, it's an invention, not yet an innovation. So this is a great invention, the Segway scooter. I think everyone has maybe experienced it at least once. Well, the Segway founder was a technical visionary. He had built many successful inventions. But his vision was to make the Segway a mainstream device. His vision was like that of Bill Gates. Bill Gates had a vision of a PC on every desk, and he realized that with the help of many others. But the Segway founder's vision was not realized. How many people own a Segway? Yeah, no one, right? So no one ever owns a Segway. Now, if we bring the hiring and firing criteria here, for us to own a Segway and use it all the time, what would we have to give up? What would we have to fire? The car, but even more fundamental, not many of us have our walking. Yes, just walking, right? Because not everyone has a car, and yes, in those cases, maybe you might use a Segway, but for it to be a mainstream device, for everyone to have it, the most basic thing we would have to give up is walking, maybe bikes, because a lot of people have bikes. But if you think of it, walking is very good for us. I don't have to go and get this $5,000 device. I can just use my feet. The bikes are also healthier than a Segway, so I can make an argument that the value proposition of a bike is better than a Segway, even though I have to do some work. If I don't want to do a lot of work, there are electric bikes where I can decide when I want to do work. So again, in all those things, the Segway begins to lose. And so we have to ask ourselves, if it's really meant to replace walking, this seems like a failed product, but it hasn't failed because they found 2 customer segments where we do want to fire walking every now and then. Anyone guess what they are? Where it might be? Yeah, so tour operators is one of their customer segments.
Security.
And security, yes. Those are the exact 2 ones. If you go on their website, those are the 2 big landing pages they have, are their customer segments, because these guys don't want you to get tired on your feet, so you literally hire the Segway by the hour, and that is doing the perfect job it was hired to do. Now, once the hour is over or the 90 minutes are over, you fire it and go back to your feet, right? So it's a temporary job, a part-time job, not a full-time job. Same thing with the security personnel. When they go home, they don't stay on their Segway. They only use it during their shift, and then they fire the Segway and go back to their feet, because that's more convenient. So we can kind of simplify, and it seems simplistic for us to take this invention and say it failed for this reason, but it is a fundamental question to ask yourself, is in your idea, in your business, if you can identify something your customers are going to fire, then you may have an uphill battle like Segway did, because you have to convince a lot of people to try something new, to do a new behavior without a good reason, especially when there are alternatives out there, and that may not be the most optimal way of doing it. So in this picture, when people have the desired outcome, there's a push, there's a motivational push to reach that goal, and there are lots of options, and these options are existing alternatives. These options are alternatives, and I use the word alternatives and not competitors, because when I describe things as competition, people almost always think in terms of categories. So if you're a startup that's doing collaboration software, and I say, who's your competition, you probably will talk about startups doing collaboration software. Well, if we think in terms of existing alternatives, I would say that most startups that do collaboration software, their competition is not another startup, but it's usually Excel spreadsheet, or a Google spreadsheet, or email. Like, those are the things that kill them. It's not some shiny startup down the street. So the thing to realize here is that the jobs don't change. The jobs are the same, which is I want to be more productive at work. In the collaboration software case, I want to work with my team. I want to share information with them. Today I'm using email. Yes, it's overloaded, but it works. It's free. It's ubiquitous. Everyone knows how to use it. Now you're coming up with this expensive software. That switch has a lot of anxiety with it. So that's kind of what this is all about. So think of jobs as being timeless and transcending categories. This is another illustration that kind of illustrates that same point. So here's a boring commute, people in the subway. You can tell they're bored from the look on their faces. But if you see what they're doing, someone's reading an old-fashioned book. There's a laptop. These are all different categories of products. There are generations of e-book readers and 2 cell phones in here. So if you were going to compete in this space, you would be competing against all these products. Those would be all your competition, like the milkshake example. It wouldn't just be a laptop or a book or one of these things. So that's what the jobs framework helps you visualize, is that you aren't just dealing with customers and your competitors. It's rather dealing with customers who are trying to get a certain task or job done. And in the process, what they are using, all of those are potentially alternatives. All of those are potentially competitors. So it helps you to go to the existing alternative box and list those things out. So again, when you list things that your customers don't know about, they are not your competition. So if you go and talk to customers and say, for this particular job, who do you hire? And if your competitor's name comes up, then by all means you have to worry about them. But if they don't come up, then for all intensive purposes, they do not exist. So you don't have to worry about them, but you need to identify what they are using, because if they're not using anything, then you may have a latent need issue, which is like the segue, which is actually a problem that you may have to overcome. So this is the way that you kind of think of disruption or switching, is that existing alternatives that fail to get the job done are primed for that disruption. There's a kind of rule of thumb out there. So some of you might know sustaining innovations versus disruptive innovations. But a sustaining innovation, in my opinion, does a job better than before, but it may not do the job 2 or 3 times better. It may do the job 100% better, or maybe even 110% better, but it's a less than 3x multiplier on the benefit of the job. But the moment you go 3x and higher, that can cause massive switching behavior. And that is when you find disruptive technologies working, because if I can do the same job at a substantially better x, whatever that dimension is, I'm going to cause people to fire their existing alternatives and come and use me. That's precisely what happens with like Uber and taxis. So when you have an Uber experience the first time, or any of the ride-sharing types of things, you begin to realize that there were problems you never even thought of or cared about before, that now all of a sudden you're not satisfied with. And maybe you would switch and become one of those customers and switch to a ride-sharing app. OK, so if you look at if we kind of continue on this picture, our job then becomes, how do we uncover the obstacles that people have in this journey? So you have a goal or an outcome, you have existing alternatives. When you are running your interviews, ideally this is how you uncover problems. Is you're not asking your customers what your problems are, because as I said, they will give you surface answers or may not even know themselves. What you want to instead do is describe to me what job you were trying to do and what you hired, and tell me the process of how that went. And in their conversation, you're going to get signals of problems. You're going to get either frustration, you're going to get steps that are just too hard. So if you think of the taxi kind of ride-sharing type of app, the fact that people have to call a taxi and then wonder whether it's going to show up at all when it's raining outside, that's something that Uber fixed, and that was the first problem they wanted to solve. But the other thing they also fix is that once you get inside a taxi, especially if you're in a unfamiliar place like I am most of the times, I don't know how far this place is. Yes, I can Google it, but I don't know how long the ride is going to be. I don't know how much it's going to cost me. I just see this meter and it keeps going up and up and up, and I wonder, is this going to be 30 euros or will it stop at 60? I have no idea. And so I can get all those answers by using one of these apps. So those are the types of things you want to uncover in those problem interviews or in those conversations you have with customers. And those obstacles are where you're going to find the problems that you can then go solve. And that's where you find what I called early on the space for innovation. So this is a rather backwards kind of approach. So I'll first talk about the problem box here. So that's where you go and fill the problem box in the canvas. But this is somewhat a backwards approach, because rather than saying, for this customer, what are the problems, you're actually saying, for this customer, what job are they trying to get done? Let's go and study if that job is getting done. In an ideal situation, you want to find lots of evidence of the job not being done well. Because if the job is not being done well, so if I use the weight loss example, if I go and try to sell a new exercise program to somebody who has never exercised before, that's actually not going to be an early adopter, and it's going to be a hard sell. It's much easier for me to go and sell my service to somebody who has tried dieting, who has tried exercising, who has tried maybe pills and failed at losing the weight that they wanted to for whatever reason. And if I can come now with an offer, which is what this is about, if I can make it a compelling offer where I don't pretend these alternatives don't exist, but I actually talk about them and talk about why they probably failed, and those were the real reasons why they failed, and then I tell them how my offer is better, my solution is better, I can make them switch to my solution. So that's what this process is really about, is you're going out there and you're understanding the job and you're uncovering the problems instead of guessing at the problems. So in a compelling offer, there are three aspects. There's the promise that you make. The better it aligns with the job people are trying to do, the better you're going to get the pull or magnetic effect, because your offer should really pull people. So if I just had a website that said, lose weight, come and take my program and we lose weight, that's interesting. But if I could promise you a particular outcome, like we guarantee you will lose 5 kilos in 3 months, that matches your goal, and you are more attracted to my offer than if it weren't so specific. So the more specific the offer, the better. And I'm just using weight loss, and that's a pretty weak value proposition, but there are many others that you can find that are stronger than that one. But the idea is that your offer needs to match the unique value proposition. The other thing it needs to do is it needs to communicate how your solution is better than the alternative. So your demo needs to talk to the problems. If you just have a demo that's showing some nice, pretty screens, people will look at it and say, well, so what? Like, I don't see anything unique about your product. The way you make it unique is by aligning these two things. So don't pretend the alternatives don't exist. Talk about how your milkshake is better than the donut and show them the difference, right? And that's what the demo is all about. Same thing with pricing. People have a tough time with pricing because they wait for the solution and then they put a margin and say, I'm going to charge a margin on my solution, and that's cost-based pricing. What you need to instead do is price against the problem. If you can identify the alternatives and know what people are doing today, you want to tell them, today you are doing X and it's costing you Y. We're not going to charge you Y because we're better, so we're going to give you a better deal, and this is why you should switch to us. And so those are some ways that you put the offer, is don't pretend your alternatives don't exist. Actually bring them to light. And again, if they are real alternatives, your customer will appreciate that, and you actually make the switch happen even faster. So on the canvas, those would be the three elements that you would be touching. So your MVP would be part of that demo or the solution. Sorry, the solution would be, in this case, the demo piece. And then you have your unique value proposition and your revenue stream, which is your pricing model. So we'll switch gears and talk about disruptive products. So a lot of you, I use the example of a milkshake, which is interesting, but how do you communicate a disruptive product? So for that, I'm going to switch to different Jobs, Steve Jobs, and talk about how he communicated his products. And it was very much using this type of a framework. So Steve Jobs, when he was launching the iPad, which was a new device in a category, so there were lots of other tablets out there, they were not as good, he could have come on stage and said, we, Apple, have built the best looking tablet device. In the category, we are #1. So why don't you guys get in line and buy this device at $500? And that would not have gone so well, because people would be asking themselves, well, what do I use a tablet for? Right? What good is a tablet? Nobody's using it. Why should I be the first to use it? Right? So he was very smart about that. And in his demos, he never talked about tablets being the category he was displacing. He was talking about other alternatives. So in his demos, he would talk about how the iPad is more intimate than a laptop. You can take your iPad to bed. You wouldn't take your laptop to bed unless you're nerdy or geeky. But it was perfectly fine, and it's perfectly acceptable even today. I do it. My wife does it. We both have our iPads in bed. But the moment either of us have a laptop, we tell them no work allowed, right? So that's kind of the mindset and what he was trying to communicate. The same thing that happens with on the other side, which is the iPad is more capable than a smartphone. We all have small keyboards. The moment you want to do serious work, you can't do it with your smartphone, but an iPad is better. So you can see the positioning here. Steve Jobs is not saying we are in our own category, so buy us because of that. He's trying to find the alternatives. He's trying to find jobs people are already doing. So he was very smart about telling you not 10 new things you can do with an iPad, but 10 old things you were already doing with your current products and how you could do it better with the iPad. And once people see that, they will actually switch. As an experiment, so the iPad is a pretty old device. You can pick a newer device and ask people why they bought it. But when the iPad came out, I did that. I asked 10 people why they bought the iPad, and I got 10 different reasons. Some people bought it for the laptop reason. Some people bought it for the smartphone reason. Some people bought it because they wanted to read newspapers in bed. They didn't want to go and get paper and have to recycle the paper. So they went and were doing magazine subscriptions or newspaper subscriptions. So everyone has a different job for why they hired the iPad. But once you understand the job, you understand the dimensions of how you might communicate your product. So that would be the element of how you might, first, once you understand the problem, how you might build a compelling offer in your solution interviews and how you pull people towards your offer and make that switch. Now, when you're building your offer, you do have to be careful about some negative forces. There are these forces of inertia. So inertia are habits of the present. So whenever you create switching behavior, there is some inertia that's involved with it. So in the weight loss example, if people don't have a gym membership, for instance, and my program requires them to have exercise equipment, they either have to go and buy exercise equipment, rent it, or go to the gym. And those are inertial elements. It's like, I want this program, I want this outcome, but I don't want to do all these other things. And so you have to understand that, because that helps you to design your MVP. So that helps you reduce some friction. You don't have to reduce all of it, but reduce some of the friction. The other negative element is, as people envision themselves using your product, they begin to ask themselves, well, what if I start using this product and it actually fails on me? It doesn't really work that well. This is where risk reversals help. So this is where having a pilot period, or having a money-back guarantee, or having a concierge service where you say, if anything goes wrong, just pick up the phone and we'll come there to fix it for you. All those things kind of help in reducing that. So again, when you're building your offer, it's important to understand what these things are and then be able to create something that talks to those types of things. So actually, while I'm on this thing, I'll share one other story here. Once you understand this picture, it allows you to really understand how to position your offer. So let's say I'm selling a mattress that reduces back pain. It's good for people who have chronic back pain. It reduces the amount of pain they have in the morning. When do you think is the best time to advertise? Anyone? In the morning? How about at 2 a.m. at night when they can't sleep? So I think the morning is good, but in the morning they're distracted by so many other things. Maybe they'll see your ad, maybe they won't. But at 2 a.m. at night when they can't sleep, they'll wake up, and what are they going to do? Probably go on the internet or pick up their phone or go turn on the TV, and they have your full attention, right? They have this pain, they're feeling the pain, and they will turn on the TV, and if you have an ad there, it talks to all the things that we talked about here, it will pull them like a magnet. And so this one mattress company talks about how they sell most of their mattresses at 2 a.m. at night, because they've realized that that's the best time to really put their infomercial on and talk about the benefits of their product. So that kind of is the mindset you need to have. Once you understand this picture, you really understand who you're trying to target, not as a demographic, but really as that triggering condition. And you go to where they are, and you put your offer in front of them, and you can do a lot of very rapid testing with them. OK, so this is another example. Maybe we can do this. Anyone here own an Apple Watch? Maybe one person? And I'm going to make a guess that you were not wearing a watch before that. Yeah, see, and the answer, and he said no. And so I've done this in all of my talks, in all of my workshops, and that's always been the case. And it's the case because when you don't have a watch, you have nothing to fire. You can be an early adopter, and you can try an Apple Watch, which the value prop was not very clear when Apple launched it. I don't know if you were happy with your hire or not. Like, so maybe can you share, like, why did you buy the watch? It was so he didn't even pick it. Yeah. So his significant other or friend thought this was something he would like, right? But that's the thing, is that I have a watch, and so when I see the Apple Watch, it has to be substantially better than this watch. It has to do a lot more than tell time. And this is a good watch. I like this watch. I'm tied to it. I've been wearing it for many years. So firing this watch is not so simple, right? And that's why this watch is only, every time I've asked people, It's really people who have never who gave up on wearing watches and they had an empty slot on their hand. They can go and try this watch. And then, of course, if you follow this up and ask them, are they happy with the hire? What are they really using it for today? You sometimes get some very interesting answers because there are some use cases here. Some people like it. Other people don't get as much value as they thought they might have when they first bought it. But again, those are all things to kind of help you realize that. This other one I'm just going to walk through because I want to leave some time for questions. This is an example of a bad landing page. So this is a landing page of a product. You can kind of look at the image. It's an iPhone app, and I think they have Android as well, that allows you to see any airline information, the departure arrival board in any airport in real time. And so I ran into this app a few years ago, and I thought this was interesting, but who would actually buy it? Because the first thing that I would say is bad about it is that there's no customer segmentation on here. There needs to be a picture at least of somebody who might use this app, maybe a busy traveler, because that communicates who this is for. Maybe a limo driver, because limo drivers need to know where all these airlines are coming in and out. Just showing me the real-time information was not enough. And I thought about this, would I buy this app? Would I not buy this app? Because I travel a lot. And at first I said, no, I'm not going to buy it for $5, even though it's not that much. It just would be a waste of money. But then I found a use case, and I convinced myself, because I had recently read Jobs Thinking. And my use case was, if I can use this app when I land into an airport where I have a connection, which I frequently do, and jump the line, which means I come in early and I can go on an earlier flight, and I can detect that quick enough instead of getting into the airport and looking at the board. That can help me get home faster. I get in line faster than anyone else through a phone call. That would be worth $5. And I had to think of that use case myself, and I've used the app many times since then for that, till the app went out of business because I think they just had bad marketing. They didn't really talk about the job. They were just talking about a feature or a benefit here. But if you think in terms of jobs, which is what are your customers trying to do? In my case, I'm on Friday going to be flying back home. I'm going to fly from here to Dallas. I'm going to have to go through immigration, and then I have a hop to Austin. And there are many flights to Austin on the hour. And so if I can get home 1 or 2 hours earlier, that's worth money to me. I would pay $5 a month if somebody could just help me get on earlier flights. And there are some companies doing this. One of the companies is TripIt, where you basically give them your itinerary. If there are delays, they actually suggest alternate flights that they can book you on. If there are earlier flights, they actually help you get on those earlier flights. So that is a company thinking about how can we get a job done, not how can we give you a bunch of features and you figure out what to do with it. Right? So that's just something to bring to mind. So kind of in the last thing I'll share with you is, and this is the real kind of power of this, is that we all want to build better products. We all talk about better products, but we don't know what better really means. But once you understand the job and you can fill out a worksheet like this one and start talking about the success criteria and the context and all these other things, you begin to identify what are the dimensions of better, what might better actually means in the eye of your customer, and you'd focus on those types of things and not the other things. So again, many examples of how if a customer says, give me a print feature, which we got with when we had our online lean canvas tool, many customers were asking for a print feature, and we thought the print feature was pretty boring. We were not going to build it. Why should we build print when there's a browser print function? But once we began to interview them and ask them what they're going to do with the printout of a canvas, they said, why? We want to present it. We want to show it. We want it to look nice. Well, we said, you don't need print for that. We can actually build something better. So using the Steve Jobs quote as an inspiration, the customers cannot tell you what they want. They will ask for a feature like give me a printout of the canvas, but we can go out and build a slideshow feature. We can go out and build an export feature where you can stick this into a presentation. The customers never asked for that, but that's what we ended up building, and they liked that even more than the print feature. Right? So that's kind of the message over here, is that once you are able to do these types of things, you can actually practice this a little bit better. Right? That's all I have. Happy to take any questions. Yep.
When you said the consumer has to fire a product, it means he has to take the decision.
Yes.
He has to really think about firing it. And I think like the banana and the milkshake.
Yes.
Is it not sometimes more obvious to make this choice?
Well, sure, but it's still a choice that they make. So I guess when you say that, yeah, I think firing maybe emotionally or even maybe.
But you have to take the decision to fire, not just to switch.
Right, but sometimes the switching is so subtle that when you look back, you realize, and this is what the power of jobs is, or just anything in general. So any of you who have been upgrading your TVs or your screens on your computers know that when you go from a small screen to a big screen, it looks nice for a few days, but then you get used to it. But the moment you have to go back down to a small screen, you hate it, right? So this is the thing. When you do a job better, people appreciate it, and there's an instant switching, right? And sometimes even unconscious, but sometimes you don't realize it, but it's still happening. And that's what this is. That's why it's such a subtle thing, rather unconscious. But if you can key on it, you can actually influence a lot of powerful decisions. So to me, it's the same thing of, if I just know that 10 customers started, because if you look at the milkshake example, not many people knew milkshake could be a better alternative than the banana. Those people were early adopters. They discovered this. But if I, as a company, and that was the last suggestion, which I didn't highlight, is that you need to do a branding campaign. You need to tell people how a milkshake is a good breakfast alternative, and by putting in fruits and things, you can make it a healthier alternative, and you almost start to tell them why it's better for commuters, and you advertise to commuters, right? So then those commuters that were using bananas will all of a sudden say, this banana makes me hungry, that milkshake is better, I'll try that next. So again, it may be a subtle switch for the ones who do it, but you can force it, or you can almost make it happen for the others. Yes?
How do you communicate on a landing page or a website you have done to test your product and your solution to different customer segments?
Sure. So oftentimes it goes back to the word you use. It's a landing page and not a home page. So your home page typically is, here's my company, here's my logo, here's what we generally do, and it's the most boring page on your website. It should get the least amount of traffic. But your landing page is where you bring people that ideally, and we have started to do this ourselves, is we have started to build very specific landing pages that are specific for jobs. So just to give maybe make it a little bit of a more illustrative, is that when I started leancanvas.com, my early adopters were all lean startup practitioners like you guys. They all kind of knew what lean startup was, what a lean canvas was. And so all the language there was about how you can use it for hypothesis testing and all the stuff. One day I got and we left that page for many, many years. One day I got a support request from a fisherman in Chile, a business owner in Chile, but he had a fishing company. And my whole thing was, how does a fisherman find the lean canvas? And I got him on the phone, and I said, what were you trying to do on the site? So it's a subtle way of saying what job, like what were you looking for? And he said, well, I'm trying to get a new bank loan from my bank, and they're forcing me to write a business plan, and I hate writing business plans. And so over drinks last night at a networking event, I was complaining about having to write a business plan, and someone said, don't write a business plan, do a lean canvas instead. And that's the job he wanted. He did not come here to become a lean startup practitioner. He didn't care about lean. He wanted to write a business plan. That was the job he wanted. So on our page now, we actually target those keywords. When somebody is looking for a loan, or someone is looking for raising money, or someone is looking to write a business plan, we don't drive them to our homepage and talk about lean startup. We talk about how writing a business plan is just horrible. It takes too long. No one's going to read it. Do a lean canvas instead. So that's an example of how you can figure out, again, what people are trying to do, where they may be, and then put your offers there, which could be ads, which could be content, and then you're pulling them to a specific landing page that then only talks about that job. And the conversion there can be just phenomenal, because it connects, there's that congruency that we talk about. And so we have landing pages for many jobs. So we have landing pages for people who are doing agile and want to do lean. We've got landing pages for people who want to raise money. So there are many different landing pages we have, and that's where most of our traffic goes, in a bunch of pages, not just the home page. Right, other questions? And then maybe I'll say one other thing that people have, and this again goes to the switching thing, is especially when people have alternatives, sometimes having switching sites or switching pages are also interesting. So you can go and search for, Intercom is a good example that does this. If those of you that follow Intercom, you can go and search for Intercom versus Zendesk or something, and they have got pages for all their competitors. Like, why is Intercom better than Zendesk? Because if they don't answer the question, you are going to be trying to answer it. It's much better to not pretend your competition doesn't exist, because assume your customers are smart and they're going to do comparison shopping, and put it all out there. So instead of them doing the research and coming up to a wrong conclusion, you can try to influence it by telling them what you think is better about your product. And those pages, and they also have a story on this, on how those pages convert very well for them in terms of people searching for alternatives for other products and then coming on intercom and saying, this looks better, I'm going to try it. Yes, there was a question or comment? No?
Yeah, just one question. I remember venture capitalists once telling me, or telling our team early on, guys, when you don't have competition, you usually don't have a market. And this is common talk at the time. Now, would you say that is it almost an equation to say if you do not have competition to fire or the job to be done, that's probably a fair indicator that there is no demand for your product, or are there exceptions to that?
There can be exceptions. So on the first instinct, I would say if a team comes and says we have no competition, that's a big red flag, right? Right off the bat. It's like maybe you're only looking in your category. Maybe there are these alternatives.
I totally agree. I'm just trying to see
okay.
what carries over the
But there is a non-consumption example. So there are instances where people have given up. Like if I look at Uber, for instance, that's maybe a good example. Is that people always ask me that question, is that how, Uber stumbled into the problem, but how might you have gone about it using this, kind of using a problem approach? Because people didn't know they had a problem with taxis. Everyone complained, but it was just, and that's the thing, is that we get used to workarounds, we get used to bad experience, and we don't demand things better because we don't think there's anything better, right? But if you really looked at it as a job of, here's a family or a traveler, they're taking a trip, they're trying to get to the airport, life happens, maybe they're running a little bit late, they call a taxi. If you draw the customer journey diagram of that experience, it's a horrible one because there's these roller coasters of, will the taxi come, will it not come? And when they come, it's the wrong taxi. Maybe we can't put all our luggage in there. There's all these things that can happen. And so if a company were really trying to say, we want to do something in the transportation space, you would go and search for the customer journeys. Now, nobody would say that we are using a ride-sharing app because they don't exist. But you are looking for, where is there evidence of non-consumption? Where are people maybe not using something because either it was out of reach or out of market? And you can then create something. Maybe a better example than the Uber one might be the PCs. So if you look at mainframes, mainframes were out there used by high-end computers. There were lots of non-consumers. All of us who have PCs now couldn't afford a mainframe. But once those things came about, even there were alternatives. If you look at all the cases that got fired, they were typewriters. People went from typewriters to word processors, or people went from books for financial accounting to Excel spreadsheets. Those were the top killer productivity apps of the time. So my point with all of that is that when you look deeper, there are going to be very few cases where you can't create switching behavior. If you really create something out of nothing and create a brand new behavior, I'd be very surprised because I haven't been able to. I've looked very far and wide at all the things that have come and gone. Advertising as well. Advertising has been happening for hundreds of years. It's just that before there was a guy on the street with a big sign. Now we do it on Google and Facebook, and we have sophisticated algorithms to do it. But it's the same exact job. So that's why I say jobs are timeless. And if a company is hard-pressed to find the switch over, in the beginning it can seem like non-consumption, which is where I was going. But if you can find over time what people will switch away from, then it becomes a bigger red flag.
So what you're saying in essence is it's not, you can't nail it from the problem identification point of view. If you stretch out the job to be done, usually that's a better way of finding what's really going to be converted. But see, what I was getting at is, it's a question, I don't have the answer. But
yeah.
Sometimes when you work on some stuff that's really new and there is no comparison, there's no obvious firing, you ask yourself the question, am I dealing with something for which there is no use, which is the normal, this is where the VCs say,
yeah.
very well known comes in. Or is that excessive? Other cases when it's so new that in fact it can be worthwhile doing, it's just much more dangerous, but it'd be great. Let's take an example. You remember Dropbox?
Yep.
We drop, everybody's familiar with Dropbox, or you save all your files to one thing from all your machines. When he went around, looked for money with VCs, they all said to him, no need for this.
Actually, it wasn't so much. It was a very crowded market. I mean, they were already big people doing file sharing in there. This was actually, there's too much competition. Like, how can you differentiate yourself? But what Drew Houston was able to do, just with his video, demonstrate how seamless that experience would be. So while people were dragging files and waiting for upload things, he was like syncing things like magic. He was like doing versioning. He was doing things that the techies, and those were his early adopters, they just fell in love with. And that's what, so in their case, I would say that it was not so much a case of there wasn't. Now there are instances where you come up with an invention, like you come up, like if you were the inventor of the multi-touch glass, you know, in your lab you come up with this and you start dreaming up of possible applications. In those instances, I would say personally, I try to recommend startups to be in the innovation space versus the invention space, simply because it's much harder to invent something and then also take it to market. That's the whole technology commercialization. It usually has a bunch of inventors. It can take an undeterminate amount of time to perfect and make it commercial ready, like prime time ready. But once those inventions are out there, someone like Steve Jobs sees it and says, this is going to be great for my phone because I don't want the keyboard. I'm just going to write on this thing. But it takes that person to see it, but the inventor didn't see it because he's not, you know, he was not the Steve Jobs.
Basically, your take is, if there is no obvious problem, if there is no obvious job to be done, and there's nothing to fire, then the chances are most likely you're wasting your time.
So in my, yeah, so I could be wrong, but I'm just saying that as far as I stand here today and I've looked far and wide, I would say that to be true, yes. All good? Well, thank you very much.